time for a conversation between Zeinab Badawi, chair of the Royal African Society and a member of MINDS, the Mandela Institute for National Development Strategies, and Mary Robinson, chair of the international NGO The Elders and former president of Ireland. A conversation inspired by a quote by Nelson Mandela: "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world."
Mary Robinson, it is always such a pleasure to be interacting with you, albeit I can't see you and it's just across the airwaves, as it were. So here we are, the challenge of learning the future of education. And I know that you have got so much experience in myriad ways. But of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, which began as a health crisis, has very quickly become an economic, social, and even political crisis that's left no corner of the world untouched. However, it has led to calls for building back better, and in terms of education, making sure that people are educated, particularly the young, to be prepared to take on the kind of jobs that the economy will need to recover in a green, inclusive and sustainable way. So just flesh out for us your thinking on that.
Well, it's also a pleasure to be with you, Zeinab. And I'd like to begin by reframing the way the title given to this section, which I understand is "Education is the most powerful weapon." I don't like that. It's kind of male and warlike. And no. Education is the most significant human right because it enables all the other rights. If you know, because you're educated to it, that you have rights, how much more you can cope with what life brings. But you're right, COVID has provided us with a particular challenge, and it has brought home a truth that we understand better now, and that is that we need lifelong education. And that education has to be an education to learn to live sustainably in a green, regenerative future. And no country is doing that well. So it's a huge learning. And quite honestly, I am learning by the day in the Zooming that I'm doing. And I'm doing it in part as chair of the Elders. And we're trying to encourage that we have a COVID immediate crisis, and then looming behind that, we have the climate crisis, which is urgent. And therefore, we have to come out of COVID in a way that aligns with the Paris Climate Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's different for developed and developing countries, as you very well know. We have to understand the lessons of COVID. And to me, they are quite important. I would summarize them briefly as 4 lessons. And the first is that collective human behavior actually matters. It's the only thing protecting us from the vaccine. And that collective behavior in the developed world has to be a collective rethinking of our consumer habits, of how much we produce that is stupid and throw away in plastic and destroying our oceans and our food chain at the moment. So a lot of thought into that. The second point and lesson of COVID is that government matters. Government that deals well with COVID saves lives, saves health, saves economies. And I'm glad, as I'm sure you are, that it's women-led governments that have been doing quite well. And the third point is that science matters. And so as we come out, we've been listening to the health experts. We have to come out and listen to the climate scientists. And then the next point is that compassion matters. It's subtle, but, there wasn't much empathy for the parts of the world that were being affected most. This is the climate justice argument, the injustice of climate change, affecting the poorest countries and communities, the gender dimension, the intergenerational injustice. But there wasn't much empathy in the richest parts of the world, the parts that should be coming off fossil fuel more quickly. Now we're all out of our comfort zone, and I hope there will be more empathy and openness to the other.
So when you say education is a lifelong process, so do you mean by that, for example, people in the more advanced economies who've perhaps been engaged in activities related to fossil fuels or whatever, they have to be retrained, and I hate this word, but I'll use it, and reskilled, as it were, so that they can take on the new green jobs that hopefully will be yielded.
Absolutely, and it needs to be done with what we call just transition. I'm very glad that the EU has a just transition mechanism, and it's a really important concept that as we make the transition, we don't discard those who helped to build the economies of the developed world, which were built on fossil fuel. And those workers in coal and oil and gas, and in my own country, Ireland, peat, have to be part of the move forward with their communities. So we have to make a special effort to ensure that the green jobs and the training for them is available for those communities. And that's all part of education. But schools and even preschools and schools and universities also have to really give young people the capacity to give that leadership. When you go into a green school in Ireland, I'm overwhelmed by the way young people really get it, and they're into a circular economy already. There's actually a capacity of young people, as they're doing with their Fridays for Future, to educate my generation, which so failed, and your generation, which pretty failed too, to address these issues in time.
I don't want my children to think that I can learn from them. So I'm hoping they're not listening.
No, you can, Zeinab, you can.
No, you're right. So it's interesting. You framed this debate about education in terms of human rights. And of course, another aspect of human rights, gender rights, you've been a very, very staunch advocate for gender equality. But another aspect of education really is teaching women and girls about their sexual and reproductive health rights. And sadly, we've seen that COVID-19 all over the world has seen an increase in domestic violence as women are locked down with abusive partners. And, this is a very, very important, often overlooked aspect of education. So I wonder if you could just highlight here your concerns about this particular subject.
Yes, I think a lot about girls' education, because the elders recognized at an early stage that we should help to promote girls' education to reduce early child marriage. It's one of those kind of hidden, sensitive issues for countries, but also for a lot of small organizations trying to deal with it. A few years when Archbishop Tutu was our chair, we prioritized looking at girls' education, tackling as you say, issues of reproductive health, but also not falling into early child marriage, which denies girls so many human rights. And we traveled to Ethiopia. We went up to the Amhara region in Ethiopia, myself and Archbishop Tutu and Guru Brundtland. And later we went to the Bihar state in India. And we went to a school there, and I'll never forget it, where girls were clubbing together so that if a girl heard conversations between her parents and some strangers that were, about the girl having to marry this older man, that they would group together and come and beg that she'd stay on another year in school. And I'll never forget those messages. And now I see, because of COVID, when schools are shut or when girls don't have access to the internet and can't join in, and when they have to do home duties more in the COVID crisis, the numbers of child marriages is increasing dramatically. And that makes me so sad as a mother and grandmother myself. So we really need to reinforce the point of access to education as a basic, not only human right, but that significant right that enables all the other rights. And that has to be much more of a priority. We shouldn't be cutting back on development aid. I'm very sorry that the UK, that is leading in the COP26, is also cutting back on its dramatic legislation for 0.7%, which I so often praised. And now it looks as if that's not going to be a leadership point for Britain in leading on the climate issue.
Mary Robinson, thank you so much indeed. Ever the human rights defender and champion. We salute you, and may you flourish in all your efforts on behalf of humanity. It's been my pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you, Zeinab. It's been a pleasure for me.